Okay, so this session is all Michael Fitzgerald's fault. He sent me an email and said we organize a discussion session on the future of robotic telescope networks. So the emphasis here is going to be on the future and on networks. And so what we're going to do is each of the participants, and we'll just start, Todd, with you and move this way, briefly introduce yourself and then tell us a little bit about your network or what you're working on, and then particularly talk a little bit about what you think the future will be. And then we can then address some of these questions. And so.
All right. Thank you, Russ, for organizing this, and Michael. I'm Todd Boroson. I'm the observatory director at Cumbres Observatory. And I have the advantage that Wayne started this morning and told you about the hardware and the motivation and the history. And I'm going to kind of go on from there and tell you a little bit about how we see our place in the set of capabilities that are used for astronomy, particularly research, but I'll get to education at the end. And I'm going to talk to you about what I see our evolution as being. And then I kind of want to end by really moving into the education area, because it's been really fascinating for me to think about bringing these groups together that have some overlap, but not complete overlap, and thinking about maybe how they could have more overlap. So let me start by saying, let me remind you, Las Cumbres Observatory, we have 18 telescopes. We have two 2-meter telescopes, the Hawks, north and south. We have 9 1-meter telescopes at 4 different sites, and we have now 7 40-centimeter telescopes. We're deploying a few more of those. So in the end, and we plan to deploy a few more 1-meter telescopes. In the end, we'll have complete rings that can follow things 24 hours a day in the north or in the south. They're instrumented with, each size is instrumented with identical instruments so that we can pass observations off from site to site. There were really a few things about our network that make it unique. Although I have to say, having now heard more of the presentations from other observatories, other networks, I'm discovering it's not quite as unique as I thought it was. But I think we still have some things to brag about. So first of all, Wayne talked about the capacity. When you have 18 telescopes, and we as he said, we generally imagine that each telescope gives us 2,000 hours a year. That's a lot of hours of telescope time per year. And so a consequence of that is that we really focus on very large projects. The other thing is about that is that we're totally scheduled in a dynamic way. So this is not I can't remember this is not the dispatch scheduling. This is, we know everything that's planned to be observed for the next week, and we're going to produce an optimal schedule that's going to get the most of that in. And we consider priorities of different observers because the time is given out by different time allocation committees and so on. So at any given time, we have an optimum schedule for our network. The other thing that's interesting about that is I talk to other observatory people who are operating big telescopes, and they think time domain means interrupts. And basically, none of our observations are interrupts. Everything is scheduled because our scheduler runs in 5 minutes. And so if something has to start in 10, it can start in 10 without interrupting anything else. The second thing, of course, is the global coverage and the uniform instrumentation. So that allows us to follow things 24 hours a day. I've done an observation 48 hours straight every 5 minutes. We do very, very long sequences that go on for months, pretty reliably. Of course, you're always subject to weather, but when you have that many telescopes, you're less subject to weather because you have other sites you can pass off to. Rapid response, I already mentioned. We have a special rapid response mode for the GRBs or whatever that you want to get on really, really quickly. We've done things as quickly as 2 minutes after receiving an alert. The other thing, though, that, and again, I just heard this a minute ago for the first time, is the basic interface to our observatory is through APIs. We have these application programming interfaces so that anyone could build software that could talk to our observatory. You could build software that can request an observation if you have authorization to do that, to monitor the observation, to get back the data, to get all the information about the observatory and the data. So we're already in the mode where we are expecting people to build other big software products that are going to connect to our observatory in an automatic way, and that's the direction we're moving. Now let me get on to the future. We're really now early, but certainly in the golden age of time domain astronomy. We've had PTF for a few years, we've had Kepler, we've had Swift, we've had a bunch of different projects that are finding things that change in the sky. We're about to have ZTF and LSST particularly that are going to raise the whole level by several orders of magnitude. Now for us, being 1 and 2 meter telescopes, it's really ZTF, which is going to start next year, that's going to really put the threshold much higher than it's been before, because ZTF is going to go down to 21st magnitude, but it's going to survey the whole sky every 3 nights. And so the prediction is that every night there are going to be a few hundred new transient objects discovered. So that's way more than we can follow up, a few hundred new ones per night. It's pushing everyone towards thinking how to do everything automatically. It's not just pointing your telescope. It's now taking this stream of alerts that's going to become a fire hose of alerts with LSST and turning it into an observing plan for whatever follow-up facilities there are. So we are going to evolve into this ZTF LSST era by doing 3 things. We're gonna complete the northern ring, because ZTF is going to be in the north, and that's coming next year. So that's the most urgent. We're talking with we're limited to 1 and 2 meter telescopes. There's a lot of interest. We're talking to operators of big telescopes, in particular NOAO and Gemini, about how they could join our network, and their telescopes could be scheduled by our scheduler to have a dynamic schedule of observations in support of time domain discoveries. Thanks. We've kind of pioneered this with the WISE 1 meter telescope, which we've incorporated into our network by using ASCOM as an interface between their telescope control and our observatory control, and that seems to be working pretty well. But we're going to have to come up with other solutions for a lot of these other older telescopes. And then the third part of our plan for the future is to work on building this infrastructure that's going to tie together the alert streams with the follow-up facilities. So as I said, we're in a good spot because you already talk to our observatory through APIs and our archive through APIs. And we're trying to get the whole astronomical research community engaged in doing some of this work. So the idea is to bring the whole community along on the effort of producing these pieces of infrastructure that are going to tie together a system of time domain astronomy from beginning to end. So that sort of, from a very high level, is my view of where we're going. Complete the network, add more telescopes, build the infrastructure. And I want to end by saying on the research side, we've discovered that the really big projects, the projects that really take advantage of the things that we uniquely can provide, the number of hours, the fact that you can monitor things reliably over long periods of time, the fact that you can do rapid response, the fact that you can build software that's optimized for different things. We've discovered that those projects that do all that stuff are the most impactful. We have some key projects that we run, and they publish 70% of the papers that come out of our network, even though they don't use anywhere near that much time. And I've been wondering since I first started at LCO whether there were educational projects that would fit into that same mold. Are there things that people aren't thinking about because they just seem too big, or you could never get the resources to do them? I think all the educational projects that I've heard about are great projects, but I wonder if there's something else that's more at the scale and scope of our network. And I want to say also, Edward Gomez is our education director. He's going to be talking about our education program on Wednesday. And he and I have worked hard over the last few years, and I think we've made some progress in some of the areas, but this is an opportunity to get more people thinking about it. So that's my preamble.
Well, thank you. My name's Richard Berry. Those of you who have long memories will remember that between 1976 and 1991, I was editor of Astronomy magazine. So probably some of you as small children were reading the magazine back then. I'm on this panel because it's impossible to say no to Russ. Will very soon be involved in operating a network system, or at least serving as the interface between the teaching community, that's the high school teaching community, and that network. That network is AAVSO.net, which consists right now of 5 65mm telescopes, each with an ST8 type CCD on it. And formerly, that system had been designed and built with private funding by Arnie Hendon to do Arnie Hendon's Bright Star survey, which he had a list of 1,800 stars, and this was a scheduled scheduled queued system that would observe all night long, shooting these different fields, variety of different kinds of stars in this. He used this, and it's been running for about 10 years from the oldest telescopes. This was not used much by outside people. It created the Epoch database with somewhere between 30 and 100 million stars in it, because he solved everything on it. Recently, because this was actually turned out to be quite expensive to operate in terms of staff time, they created a task force to see if we could not put more value for AAVSO members and the community into that network. I'm the guy who said, we need to bring in teachers, and I know some teachers who would really like to use this. So my position right now is actually listening to the rest of you guys, and in terms of where I'd like to see things going, is the less we can have, the less software we can have on the student's computer. And the more it's web-based, the more the data, it doesn't have to be moved around a lot, or at least onto the student's computer, the better off we'll be. Most of the problems I've encountered so far working with students is, well, how do we get the data onto your Mac from my PC, because they forgot to bring a thumb drive. Really dumb things. I'd really like to say, well, your data's in the cloud, the software's in the cloud, here's how you're going to do it. So I'll turn it over.
Hi, my name is Aaron LaCluyze. I'm from UNC SkyNET. You may remember me from such talks as just a minute ago. We have, for those who missed that talk, we have a global network of robotic telescopes. We have about, what did I decide, about 16, 18 telescopes roughly online right now, spanning everywhere from Australia to parts of Canada. As far as the future of robotic telescope networks, I think a lot of the bases have been covered already, so I don't want to echo too many of those sentiments. But I think the future of robotic telescopes is bigger. I think a lot of what we right now think of as, oh, those are big telescopes, you know, the 1 and 2 and maybe even 4-meter class telescopes. I think you're going to see those transition from being either traditional, we fly to the telescope-based observing, which almost no one does these days, and even away from the kind of remote observing via a webcam where you've got a telescope operator. I think you're going to see those transition in the next 5 to 10 years into true robotic telescopes. We are it's great that we're alive at this time in astronomy because we are about to see this true paradigm shift with things like LSST. The astronomer of the future is really a programmer because there's going to be so much data that's generated by so many telescopes and by telescope networks. The biggest problem we have to overcome is how do we sift through that all? And I think that's going to be the greatest challenge we're going to face. And that's not a bad place to be, honestly.
I'm Russ Jen, California Polytechnic State University. And kind of my interest these days in robotic telescopes and networks is essentially, and I'd like to address, Todd, is kind of your challenge of how on one hand, there's things that have lots of educational values. You have projects and the educational value is great. On the other hand, you can have where the science value is high, but it's very difficult to get students to do it. And so I'm very interested how do you get these two together? Just as a quick example, so we started out actually doing time series variable stars with CCD cameras and reducing the data. And that turned out to be too difficult. The students were camped at my observatory all the time. They ate up all the food out of the refrigerator. And by the time we got the data and reduced it, the semester was over and didn't have time to really write the papers. And so we switched to something really simple, and that was using a less than $200 astrometric eyepiece, and with amateur telescopes, 6, 8, 10-inch telescopes, and we would observe wide, bright double stars. Well, we could actually publish it because the Washington Double Star Catalog is interested, but the scientific value of really wide, bright double stars has been observed, hundreds of times, is not very high. So the education value is great. A lot of hands on the telescopes, and the students love it. They got a published paper. Science value, very low. So the next step was we started, well, let's use CCD cameras. And it turns out the astrometry is not too hard to reduce. And so that worked. Now we could go closer and we could go fainter. And so now it had greater scientific value. And but then we started thinking, well, can we increase the value even further? The CCD astrometry of double stars is limited by scene. And the more interesting binary stars, they're below the scene limit and they have short periods. So started looking into speckle interferometry, joined Brian Mason at a run at Kidd Peak and got the bug, and but it required an EM-CCD camera, and they cheapest ones back then were $14,000 and the more expensive ones were $40,000. But I talked Andor into a half-price camera and talked to American Astronomical Society in a small grant. So we had an EM-CCD camera, and we applied for time at Kidd Peak, got time a couple of weeks on the 2.1 meter telescope, and used it on lots of other telescopes. And so now we were really state of the art in terms of the science. We were observing things of high scientific interest. Well, the interesting thing that's happened recently is Sony developed a back illuminated chip that ZWO and QHY, two of the ZWO camera with this chip costs $400. It has a 1 electron read noise, and it's a very high speed camera. And we are able to do double star astrometry down to 12th magnitude. On an 11-inch telescope, we can get separations down to half an arc second. And it's just, all of a sudden, we can do this wonderful science. And so now when I look at robotic telescopes, we've been talking with Paul Gardner. We mentioned that we're going to hear more about the Great Basin Observatory. So here's a few things. So they're working, they're planning on having we're going to put a high-speed camera, one of these $400 cameras on, how much does the whole observatory cost roughly? $650K, the $400 camera, but it's going to do state-of-the-art speckle interferometry, and it's going to be automated, and there's some wonderful projects that we'll be able to, and we're looking very close at the test follow-up to look. It's got an 11 arc second pixel, and we can do with a telescope GBO, we'll probably be down to 3/10, maybe 2/10 of an arc second, and be able to look for these eclipsing binaries that are going to not, kind of fouling things up. At any rate, It's more of a, that's a little bit of meeting a challenge of what you do with a robotic telescope. Having scientific value where you require the network that students could do it all in one semester and get a published paper. That's more challenging, but I'd like to accept the challenge and figure something out.
How many people were here for my talk earlier? Virtually everybody, so I'm not going to repeat anything. You can imagine what we've heard now is our two telescope networks, which is where I'm going to concentrate, both of which are composed of small number of tightly integrated telescopes. You can imagine what, you know, I don't even know what is a telescope network. Is it a bunch of telescopes out there that you can log into from your PC? Or is it telescopes that talk to each other? Or is it a shared resource? It's easy to imagine a telescope network as a bunch of telescopes that you can then get on and use and say, oh, well, I want to use this telescope for this project or that telescope for that project. Do you need a network for that? Or do they talk to each other somehow share the workload automatically? I can't conceive of what, I don't think there's a shared vision of what is a telescope network. Would anybody disagree with me on that? All right, so what the heck are we doing? I have 800 plus robotic telescopes out there that are all on the network. That's a lot different than the 8 or 10 that LCO has, right? So what I've been watching is basically organic applications, what people do with them in groups or whatever, and looking for opportunities to enhance those organic applications. There's nothing, I think the biggest, well, for one thing, I didn't get a chance to say this earlier, but our system has an API on it, which we've heard talked about already and has for a long time. And also, it is capable of responding to time domain triggers, and that's been in there since quite a long time, really, since 2006. So, and I got involved in the VO event thing back then, and it kind of went along for a while, and the people designing that system for delivering triggers and requests for time domain observations, they got mired in arguing over the transport of the messages instead of what to do with these triggers once you got them. And I just branched off from that, and I've been waiting for the opportunity to bring that back up. And at the previous conference, there were a couple of discussions that occurred that give me great hope that that might happen. One of the things, and I know I'm rambling, but I'm just going on a kind of stream of consciousness thing as to what I've encountered and thought about and seen with regards to whatever is a telescope network. One of the problems with the delivery of transient alerts is no one wanted to let their alert discoveries out. Oh God, you know, if I tell everybody else about them, somebody's going to write a paper before me. It was a big problem. Nobody would let them go. The pan stars, you couldn't get those things. Assassin, for a long time. Somebody told me they're now making them public, but I'm not sure they're really making them public right away, maybe in a day or 2 or 3 or something, when their value has declined considerably. But being able to respond to transients quickly, not necessarily like a GRB where you have to be on there in a minute, although you can do that. But does a set of computers out there on a network that is distributing transient alerts, is that the network of a network telescope? A networked observatory? Is it a bunch of people who can cooperate to help get follow-up data on transients based on the fact that the network is really the distribution scheme for the transients themselves? Is that a telescope network? Well, what about the telescope network that says, I want this, and you put it out there, not necessarily a transient alert, but I want this data. You put it out there, and everybody's listening to these requests for data, and somebody out there says, oh, you know, oh, I can do that. And they do it, and then they say, okay, I've got it. Well, if 2 or 3 people see this thing and they say, well, I can do it, and then 2 or 3 people get the data, well, that's an error, right? It was too much. It was an imperfection in the way the model works, but it's the right kind of error because you get more data than you thought you were going to get in the first place, right? And is that a telescope network where you get people who say, I'll take your request, and if I can do it, and I have the time, I'll do it. And then so you get a best efforts type telescope network. Then how do you solve the problem of if you have one of these heterogeneous telescope networks, how do you keep people from sending all their work or trying to focus all their work on the best telescope out there, the one with the biggest aperture and the best cameras, the best instruments and everything else, and everyone else sits out there on the side, they never get anything. So that's a problem. I had to actually watched a discussion, a panel discussion on how network telescopes should negotiate pricing in real time with computer algorithms. And these were astronomers that were talking about it, right? Now, if you don't think that that computer-based negotiating hasn't been gone over 1 million times in the world's financial market, and these guys are trying to reinvent that wheel, are you kidding me? So there's something wrong with that. So there is a huge bunch of possibilities out there. There's a bunch of really good technology. Once you branch out from the situation where you have a few, and I mean a dozen or two telescopes tightly integrated, in the case of SkyNet, the whole control is centralized. It's run from one site, and it sends work out through to the member telescopes. The people running those telescopes basically say, yep, I'm your slave, you're my master. Yes, master, I will do what you want. And that's a model. And with LCO, they have another big master, and they tell their scopes what to do. But is that the only kind of telescope network out there? All I can tell you is that I'm trying for our customers to put the technology in place so that as this stuff evolves and people actually need it, and they say, we want this, that we'll probably be able to provide that with a minimum amount of fuss instead of having to do some sort of major architectural upgrade or change in the way the system works. It's pretty darn flexible the way it is. So that's my view of networks, such as they are, or my views of networks. And I'm hoping that'll generate some discussion, which is after all what this panel's for.
I was going to almost stop you because you were leaking my plans for Uber telescope. Anybody got an M51? I need an M51. Yeah, 5 minutes apiece. Riffing off of what Bob was saying, we had some discussions a couple years ago. I was participating with Tim Puckett in his Supernova search program. And the question came up, he was doing these blocks of time. They weren't through the queue scheduler. They were just straight scripts, linear scripts. And if there was weather problems, you couldn't react to that. And so we were talking about, well, if we have this network of people, can we do a network scheduler? Can we do something that can say, oh, let's look at all the parameters. Look at weather. Let's look at clouds. Let's do image analysis on everybody's all sky cameras and see which sections of sky are even clear or not clear, and be able to overlay the target lists and see, oh, it's clear here, but oh, literally shoot the clouds, shoot the holes in the clouds. You love those phone calls. And those are the kinds of things where it's, I think I hadn't thought about what is a network. I sort of had the same feeling, but couldn't really verbalize what is this network that we're talking about. And my goal in this whole thing is how do we make a telescope or an observatory that can be put on the network, whatever that is, to make it readily accessible. My goal is to show up somewhere and be able to put it down, plug in power, plug in the network, and it'd be ready to go. So I definitely buy into this idea of network telescopes. And I think as Bob says, there's hundreds and hundreds of telescopes available out there that are on ACP, and to be able to make this meshed network of telescopes that are available to respond and react accordingly would be pretty cool. I know that's kind of hedging my bets on that.
Hedging your bets that's exactly right. Hedging your bets. I don't know where it's going either. And I don't even know what it is. What are hopefully this group of people can help us understand what you think a telescope network is, or what it's supposed to do. That being more important. What's it, other than the small ones which have a dedicated purpose.
Let's have some questions from the audience. Wayne? Here.
Try to actually reinforce Bob's question or maybe change its premise a little bit. I think sort of putting on my tinkerer, amateur astronomer hat, and I have a observatory at my house that I've been working on. What I think the most important thing to do is for the scientists to network together their stuff so that there's a broker somewhere that says, here's a class of observations, whatever they could be. And have the stuff out there so amateurs could subscribe to that data. And so it's not about central control. It's very important. Our system is very centrally controlled. It's really centrally controlled. It's really, to do a Trump, centrally controlled. But that's not what we're talking about. If we take Bob's 800 customers, all of whom have reasonably sophisticated telescopes, the science community, and I might point out the education community, should present opportunities for those instruments to go and add value. And then over time, who knows what gets worked together, you know. The second thing, and I think the big task, is you have to figure out as an amateur how to produce high quality data. At least you have to do your calibrations. You have to have stuff in your system so that it can be reduced to science. And that's what's a little bit missing right now, is the calibration side so that you could produce scientifically valid data. So that's my 2 cents on that.
Yeah, just to respond to that broker idea, at the Great Basin Observatory, we have 4 partner institutions: Southern Utah University, University of Nevada, Reno, West Nevada College, and Concordia. And those 4 partners have the whole share of the telescope. And they come and they do a project, and it's great. And then there's months go by because they don't have a whole bunch more projects in the queue. So, you know, we're trying to come up with a way to engage other people that have projects but don't have the telescope, and match those 2 together to say, you know, you're not going to necessarily have direct time on the telescope yourself, but you can work with one of the partners to provide projects and for everybody to work on collaboratively. And so it's that matching of the need and the instrument, and making it available easily, you know, whether it goes on the ICE telescope time or it switches over to some other network, and you can you know, subscribe an observatory to several different opportunities for projects coming in. So that's kind of some stuff that we're looking at.
I wanted to mention with respect to that at Great Basin Observatory, so Concordia University is one of the partners, and I'm on the staff there, that Bob with ACP is working out interfaces with a spectrograph, and then after that it's going to be with high-speed speckle camera. And we're going to have one of Optech's instrument selectors and be able to select between, you know, regular CCD observations or spectrograph or high-speed speckle interferometry. And I really like, you know, we're kind of looking, our research seminar, we reach out for research projects students can do within a semester, and we add people from the outside as team members. And so I just think we're entering the golden age where the science that can be done by students in the process of education can be of higher and higher value. And so at some point, we hope in some areas that, you know, there's no distinction really between the quality of the science done by students on the robotic telescopes and that of the professional astronomers.
Stella, I saw you shaking your head or nodding back there. What's your idea of a telescope network within the I know I'm putting you on the spot, but this is facilitation, right? So
my idea of a network of telescopes of 3,000 people all over the world being able to participate in research. And actually my ambition for a network of telescopes is 3,000 plus all of you to be able to participate in research. So from our side, from the AAVSO side, our goal is to, am I giving a mini talk now, or you should come on Wednesday? But the 2 components is first making sure that we present targets of interest in front of all of you to make sure that you know what is needed from the professional community to be observed. What is hot science? Or which star is of interest to be observed? And the second one, and that touches upon what Wayne was talking about, is to make sure that your data are of publishable quality. So you know what you're doing, you're trained, you're provided with the facilities or the training material that you need in order to make your data useful to somebody who is interested in analyzing them, in actually getting some result and publish it somewhere. So should I stop here or just keep talking?
Perfect.
All right, so that is my network. It's pretty much anyone, anywhere to be able to participate in scientific research, which is actually the mission of the AAVSO.
Hi, corresponding to Todd's quest for kind of slightly bigger projects, it strikes me to be kind of the Jupiter thing is going to be fantastic if we can do that. But also, I'm thinking, well, Rosa GHOU has a capability, and we have 100+ nations. Wouldn't it be a nice thing if every nation could get 10 LCO images? I think, just as kind of a world unifying thing. This nation has got 10 LCO. Who knows where that will go? But I think it's possible. It's a gift of the internet and you guys, and brings tears to my eyes just thinking about it. So that's my thought.
Right behind here. Okay.
I just wanted, again, in the context of previews of talks to come tomorrow, I just wanted to emphasize that in the context of your thinking here, what I'm hearing is that you guys need to also remember the importance of an archive, because there are several substantial astronomy archives that are already out there, and it speaks to having high quality data that you can trust in order to crack that wall into the professional astronomy community. You have to have a sophisticated enough archive that astronomers can get in there, see the quality of your data, then work with you to get more data, because you have to sort of prove to them that you're capable of doing the good stuff, and then they'll come and ask for more. And somebody, I'm sorry, I forgot who, was talking about the amount of data that you're having. And in fact, the professional archives are dealing with that too. So I think whichever one of you said that it was talking about bringing the data home to analyze, that's not going to be the model in the very near future. It's going to be doing the research at the source of the archive, which will benefit the education community substantially, because then there will be tools that work at the archive that you don't have to take the data home for. But in order for your data to be included in that, it's got to be in the archives network.
Okay, let's hear from Bob and then from Stella.
Okay, that's totally awesome. That's another network telescope I hadn't thought about, and that would be individually owned telescopes that are doing work, and let's not worry about how they decided what they were going to do for work, but to have their data be pushed out to a cloud, which is a community resource. So that's another type of network telescope. I love it.
So funny you mentioned that. Because the AAVSO already has that archive for about 106 years now.
Yeah.
Thank you. There you go.
I think probably one of our, oh, sorry.
Beg your pardon?
Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry. I was going to say, well, probably one of our biggest technical challenges is going to be quality control over, as integrators and as people managing these things, is how do you control the quality of this data, because it's across the board.
Funny you mentioned that, because actually this is what we are doing. So yes, it is a challenge to be able to integrate data from a very diverse community, even very diverse observing methods and very diverse background, et cetera, et cetera. One of the things that we are doing at the AAVSO is data quality control. We're talking about people who are observing visually. We still have observers who look through an eyepiece and make estimates of variable stars. DSLR, CCD, we have PEP, photoelectric photometry. How many of you know about that? Okay. But this is really accurate measurements of really bright stars at the millimag level. We're talking about a grand suite of people from all over the world who are used to dealing with data in different ways. And again, I think that the key, even in data quality or even in everything else, is training. Make sure that those people have the knowledge to even themselves diagnose their data. We do have an archive. I'm going to go back to that. We are collecting all the data in a central database, not just an archive, it's an active database. This is where data go. And through our tools, we're able to connect the database to other, this is it's variable, by the way, to other databases. Unless my voice is variable, to connect this database to other databases so that at least we have a central repository when somebody is displaying a light curve to see what a crazy object is doing, that we'll be able to get data from other sources as well. So this is one, actually this is one place where these kind of discussions need to keep taking. We know what you need and you know what we have to offer so that we can actually put something all together as a community.
Yeah, thank you very much. So I'm going to ask Richard wanted to say something, and Michael, if you could grab the mic and take it over to Rachel Freed, who's going to tell us a little bit about the Global Telescope Network.
In developing this little tiny AAVSOnet network of tiny telescopes, the very first thing we did was decentralize it. That is to make all of the telescopes look alike. Because we realized that moving raw data back and forth with calibration frames and stuff was foolish. First thing that happened was they get the headquarters and they get mixed up, and then somebody would have to undo the work and redo it, trying to guess which telescope took which flats and things like that. So each telescope will soon be completely independent. It will send back calibrated data. The next step is that the transform coefficients and stuff like that will go with those images back, so that what the user will get is completely reduced, ready to go, calibrated, and also transformable images.
Yeah, thank you, Richard. Sorry to put you on the spot there, but tell us about the GTN.
Right. So the GTN, it was established, and I'm actually going to talk about it on Wednesday also, but it was established a while ago as part of sort of a member of SkyNet and involved with the prompt network to do GBR, actually, follow up, or GRB follow up. But it's being repurposed, and actually we've been talking about using it as a place to build that community of practice that's come up here a little bit, bringing together all of the people, all of the networks, all of the different groups in one place somehow, for a number of reasons, but in large part because for a lot of programs that we're working on now or that have been developed at some point over the last 20 years, so many of them fall apart, just disappear. And it's really that community of practice, keeping a community together and active, that's really key often. And so we're thinking about sort of repurposing the GTN, the Global Telescope Network, to maybe serve in that capacity. And I'll talk about it more on Wednesday.
Could I have a question from someone in the audience we haven't heard from yet? Maybe over on this side over here. And then Stella.
Well, I was one of the stupid astronomers that was talking about how to network telescopes 10 years ago. And actually, we put a lot of thought into how one would do that. And it isn't that difficult now, because simply there are so many players and there's so much interest in doing it. Back then, we were just a couple of professional astronomers with a couple of telescopes and then just a couple of cases of how to use them. The analogy with Internet of Things is actually quite good. In order to do something that dynamic, you have to have a certain critical mass of dynamism in order to really be able to do it, make it reasonable to do. Somebody has to know that there are so many telescopes out there that if I try to put this thing together, it'll actually work. And 10 years ago, that wasn't the case. So I think that we're not really that far away from being that dynamic. We simply have to be able to start small and see how things go. And exactly like the Internet of Things, at the beginning, it's maybe not so efficient, but as you gather more experience and see what works and what doesn't work, I think it'll actually explode finally. Realize what capacity is out there which is not being used, and how relatively simple it actually could be.
That's wonderful. I think it will explode. Well, what I'd like to do to wrap this up is we'll hear from Stella, and then I'd like to pass the microphone to Todd, and we'll just kind of go back across and end with Paul and kind of give your closing statement, and then the jury will rest or something of the sort.
All right. So the question that I have for all of you is the following. You heard from Richard, for example, that a big challenge we had with AAVSOnet over the years is the fact that we tried to have a centralized source of data, even data reductions that come from different scopes, and the result was that things were confused, they were shuffled, and the wrong flats were applied to images, et cetera, et cetera. So little technical problems like that. I'm really sure if we go around the room, we'll have lots of people who are running lots of telescopes, LCO, for example, who already have how something like that is happening in a more efficient way. So I was wondering if we can actually come up with a way of sharing this kind of information so that all of us who are interested in setting up for our own, do not reinvent the wheel. There's no purpose of doing that. There's no reason for doing that. So I would be very interested in hearing what kind of ideas you have along those lines to make sure that we build a community again of know-how, even to reduce our data, analyze our data, and make sure that the end product has the quality that is actually required.
Okay, so I guess I agree that we don't know what a network is, or at least we have a number of different definitions of networks that have different problems and different goals, and we've heard about different approaches to solving those problems and achieving those goals. And so, I mean, I didn't expect that we would talk for an hour and all converge on and walk away nodding our heads and saying, yes, that's what we're going to do. But I think some interesting points have been raised. I think the point, so one point that I think what is really important is the question of whether making the data, the quality, how much does the quality control of the data, how important is that for all the different goals that you want to achieve? So in some cases, it's really important. That is, if you're going to expect people to publish peer-reviewed science papers with the data, then everything has to be reproducible, everything has to be demonstrated that it was done in the proper way, and so on. If what you're doing is trying to engage K through 12 students in understanding the scientific method, then that doesn't really matter. And so that's an example of the scope of the problems affecting what it is you think that we're talking about. Another area is whether this sort of market-based approach to building a network where everyone operates whatever they have and someone figures out how to make them all talk to each other is really, that's gonna solve a different set of problems than the tightly controlled, we've done it this way because we want to guarantee what comes out is going to be useful for this purpose. So I guess I'll end by saying I think we've made a little bit of progress in a lot of different areas, but we probably just really exposed the breadth of the question that we're trying to answer.
With the very new and very small AAVSOnet, what we need, I think, more than anything else, is to hear from potential users, typically high school type teachers with students. What do you want the thing to do? Because we got up at the SAS meeting, made a presentation, and we had one slide where we said, well, we really can't accommodate time series stuff right now. Right away, it was like the fact that we had a prohibition totally freaked about half the audience out. And it's clear they want to do time series type stuff. So what's our response to be? Well, at $6,000 a system, we could build lots and lots of computers and we could readily accommodate that. All we have to do is to find money. Because the system itself is, the scheduler just sends something out to ACP and the telescope does its own thing. So we need to know what the user community wants out of the networks.
So I'm going to start my conclusion with something that's an upside, because it may end with a downside, and I don't want to sound like a wet blanket. I think that the future for robotic telescopes and robotic telescope networks, and frankly the astronomical community as a whole, is quite bright. There are many wonderful spots that are happening. There's a lot of great cooperation that's happening. But something that the biggest challenge I think we'll each face, particularly trying to work together with robotic telescope networks, with different robotic telescope networks, is the question of funding. The biggest thing standing in our way is money. Because unless my robotic telescope network can do something better than someone else's robotic telescope network, why did I get the funding and they didn't? So it's kind of a challenge for each of us, something to always keep in the back of your heads. I would love it if we could all freely exchange all of our knowledge and all of our expertise and all of our data, that we could literally just say, hey, I need this data, and someone out there would find that data and take it for me and get it to me. But at the end of the day, we will have to pay for it. And so the challenge we have to constantly think about is, how do we make the dream possible? How do we do that going forward? And again, like I said, I don't want to act like a wet blanket, but it is something that I think that's what holds most of it. At the end of the day, that's really what holds most of the cooperation back, quite frankly.
Yeah, I'd like to close talking about a slightly unusual network. So the network right now is a network of 3 amateur astronomers, 2 in the US and 1 in France, that have C11 telescopes and this $400 CMOS camera I was talking about with 1 electron noise. And they're exploring what we can do with speckle interferometry. And they've got absolutely amazing results. It's right there with the professionals now. And another thing we're exploring is, how can we then get this to robotic telescopes? And so Dave Rose working on the software, Bob Denny's working on how we can interface ACP to a high-speed camera. There's a guy in Australia writing the software to control this app software. And then Paul Gardner's thinking about how we can put this on the Great Basin Observatory. And I'm thinking, with a $400 camera and a planet full of C11s, just think where this network can go. And so this is just one little area, double star astrometry. But all of a sudden, all these telescopes will swamp the poor folks in the Naval Observatory in Washington, D.C. with a flood of observations on really close binary stars. We're going to nail those orbits down. And it's just, I think, an example, to me, the future, this combination of all the data coming from the surveys down to us and the technology that's going to increase our capabilities. We're going to have networks on various aspects. So it's kind of various sciences, and the telescopes with the instrumentation that can address those sciences and have the right calibration. These networks will develop, and I think there's a really bright future, and we don't have to be sorry or apologize for robotic telescopes. You don't all have to have hands-on things.
Well, from my point of view, I come at it from a different angle, again, as always, with a large number of organically grown observatories. They're not, it's unlike SkyNET, which is grant funded, and unlike LCO, which is endowment funded, I suppose, and also grant funded, and also some commercial content I just found out today. But anyway, there's these observatories pop up and disappear and pop up and disappear, and there's this big population out there that I support that it's organically grown. How can these people benefit from the things that we see coming down the line in terms of LSST and friends? There's going to be, there's several orders of magnitude of disagreement over how much transient alerts are going to come out of these things. They may be, 500 a day, they may be 100 million a day. I don't know, man. But well, if it's the latter, I have no idea where they're going to go, or who's going to do anything with them. But in any case, all I can do from my point of view is to make sure that all these observatories are already ready to receive these things and execute them with some sort of logic. I have several customers right now who are doing that. They're taking requests and transient alerts both, doing some filtering, and then they put together an observing strategy for their telescope that best matches it. They may say, no, my telescope can't handle this. It's too faint, or it's in the wrong, obviously, the wrong place in the sky or whatever. But it's putting the enabled technology out there, and then watching how this evolves over time as these things, more and more of these things become available to everybody. And if we can solve the problem of people hoarding their discoveries or their things until they get their papers written, that'll be a big plus.
I think I'm gonna wrap this up with addressing kind of this reduction in the image quality and really kind of bringing it back to what does all this do for the students that are involved in this stuff. I mean, really, it's great if this network works. It's great if we all agree in this room on what a network is, but who does it help? And I think one of the more promising things is LSST and their data reduction pipeline. Their data reduction pipeline is intended to be public for anybody to be able to use it. And so if as a group people say, okay, let's adopt that pipeline, because that pipeline is going to be amazing. I've seen it in action. One of my best friends is one of the lead developers for that pipeline. And we've run GBO data through it, and it spits out a light curve for an exoplanet transit, and just like literally, here's the data, here's the curve. And and we've done a couple little tests like that, and we want to implement it at GBO as a proof of concept. But what that does is if we adopt that and students start using that pipeline, well, then when they go on and they start using LSST data, they're instantly useful. They're instantly able to be productive and to make discoveries and to move the whole greater good forward with that LSST data. Same thing with the Zwicky transient facility at Palomar. I think they've actually, I think was it Russ that was talking about ZTF earlier today? But I believe I worked on that project and did the conceptual design for the detector, but they're even talking with LSST and their competitors to team up to say, okay, well, let's use this common reduction so that all these people and all the students come up to speed on the same thing, so that when they get to GMT and EELT and TMT and LSST, they're all using the same reduction pipeline and can get results really fast. So I think, the network's great, but to address the quality, it almost a committee needs to be set up to say, this is the standard that we're going to use, so that everybody can start using it.
Michael, if you could come up here and we'll close the session out and let you close the day out, if you would.
Thank you very much all for your attendance today, and thank you for honoring me with your attendance. About 2010, 2011, I was wondering where everyone was and what they did, and they were all you guys. So thank you very much. I heard a lot about interesting robotic telescope stuff today, and it does look like there's a golden future and a lot of organic and diverse uses and ideas. So thank you very much for today. And tomorrow we start here at 8:50, and tomorrow's topic is more on the student research side. But as always, combining robotic telescopes and education as well. So thank you very much.